licensing. I thought I had an hour. I didn't realize it was 45 minutes. I do a lot of speaking, as does Don, all over the world. So we're going to speed it up a little bit. I will be here and Don afterwards for questions. This is a slide about me. I'm not going to get into it very much. You can read it later. But I will mention I'm from a company called License Fortress. We're a new way of dealing with Oracle license compliance management. And what makes us a little different is our combination of software and service, and that we offer a financial guarantee that if we give you license advice, Oracle comes a knocking, and our advice was wrong, we pay the bill, which is a little different than anybody out there in our industry. Don?
And this is me, I'm Don Sullivan. I think you probably can hear me. I'm the product line marketing manager for business critical applications and databases in our cloud platform business unit, which means I do a whole bunch of different projects having to do with everything business critical applications and such. And Mike and I run this show a lot and have for a lot of years. So take it away.
So during the presentation, I'm going to use Oracle for a lot of examples, because they're a great one to pick on and what shouldn't be happening. But I want to be very clear. IBM's just as bad. SAP's just as bad. So even though I use Oracle because it's the one I know best, they all should be brought out to the wood shop. And cloud licensing is a big deal, right? By 2020, $1 trillion in spending. And I think of Dr. Evil, 1 million, or whatever it comes out to.
So it's working apparently.
They're claiming this is working. Is this any better? Really? Oh, okay. So I like this June 15th, 2017, because that was the tipping point when more things were being developed in the cloud than not on the cloud. So as of that date, the cloud mattered. I always think about IT, and people say, when did IT matter? IT mattered when you couldn't cut a paycheck without IT, right? So cloud spending matters. And there's a trend towards using services. I built a service, right? Versus IT services rather than implementing components. And I call it the cloud stack, because they're all silos.
Hey, Michael, why don't we have a VMware silo up there? I'm missing something here. That's just something wrong with that. And yeah, why is your cell phone going on?
So what is VMware's approach to the cloud, by the way? I'll give you a little sales pitch down.
The VMware's approach to the cloud is the idea of the hybrid cloud, and that is a concept that is used very loosely in the industry. Right? So the motto of VMware, the VMware Cloud on AWS as a VMware product or VMware Cloud Foundation supported on every other cloud, the motto is our cloud is every cloud. So the hybrid cloud is both the components of your public cloud as well as your on-premises private cloud, and the ability to seamlessly move back and forth between on-premises and your public cloud components, whatever they might be. Not all of those pieces for every public cloud in the world, the 4,000 VMware Cloud partners are available yet, but it's getting closer. If you were at Dell Technology World 2 weeks ago when we announced VMware Cloud Foundation on Dell EMC, that's a hardware product supported and sold by Dell EMC. VMware Cloud Foundation supported on Azure is a Microsoft product which is sold by Microsoft, but it's a VMware Cloud Foundation image sitting on Azure. And of course, we've had the VMware Cloud on AWS for a number of years. Expect about 3,000 more.
All right, so now we've got the VMware sales pitch out of the way. All right, so you've all heard it. I wanted to give a little VMware love. And so I really like this diagram because if you actually took your corporate IT environment and you mapped it across the quadrants, public cloud, private cloud, software as a service, whether you realize it or not, you're everywhere today. That's just the reality. And the question being in the compliance business is, how do you know you're in compliance? And so I used the example my last business used to manage databases. And we would sign a contract with management to manage, let's say, 50 Oracle databases, 30 MySQL databases. And every time we went in and we did the discovery process, after we had signed the contract, we would find databases they were running their business on that management didn't realize even existed, And who knows whether they were paying for those licenses or not. And in fact, I say to people, all the rules in Java just changed. Hey, Oracle bought it, right? They figured out a way to monetize it better. They've done that, and now you've got a Java compliancy issue that you didn't have. So the rules are always changing. And in fact, I love this quote here. 42% of customers say they have challenges determining the software products they're entitled to. Right? And so here's the problem. You, the customer, want to drive down cost. What's the vendor want to do? They want to figure out how to monetize it. Right? Never the two shall meet. And they all, and I'm picking on all, have policies. IBM's got the all or nothing subscription and support requirement, right? Oracle's got the repricing policy. SAP's got the all or nothing policy. Microsoft's got the software assurance policy. These are all things that are designed to protect their revenue. You want to talk about the Oracle support repricing policy?
No. First of all, VMware's got this too. We are moving towards a subscription model in general. The whole idea of the repricing model in general is that under the circumstances that you have become more efficient at any particular point in time and reduce your overall database footprint, if you're under certain contractual obligations such as a EULA, they reserve the right within the contract to totally renegotiate your support contracts and your support discounts, which start out at 23 to 25% of your actual licensing agreements. So when they have that ubiquitous, open-ended ability, you all of a sudden have less and less leverage. So when you need to take, and this is going to be a theme of everything that we're going to talk about here, at the point in which you are doing a migration or to the cloud, or a different type of migration, or you are up for a completely different new negotiation of your existing contracts, that's when you reconsider all of this.
So the point is, it's built-in shelfware. Because if you take away that license you're not really using, all of a sudden you're going to realize it's very expensive. And so what do? You keep the software. And I think the line says, safeguards Oracle support revenue without regard to the practical value of the customer. Right? And so these licensing metrics are constantly evolving. In fact, didn't VMware have a disaster a few years ago? What was that metric
Mike, I can't believe you're bringing that up on me. You know what, the only reason he's doing this is I know I'm up here in Boston and I'm a Yankee fan and he's a Red Sox fan and all of that, so he throws that one on me. VMware went in 2012, or tried to for about 6 months, move into the not only socket-based licensing, but the memory footprint-based licensing. And yeah, well, I booed too, and I said we all booed internally, and you're all right, and guess what we did? We got rid of it really quickly. Right? 'Cause it didn't work.
Not a lot of vendors would have gone back. And by the way, who won the last World Series? I'm just curious.
It was the Red Sox, but you know, and I know the Red Sox are dominating the 2000s. They've won 4 World Series, but let me tell you all, the exact same thing was the case last century, and the Red Sox won their 4th World Series in 1918, Michael, and things turned out fine for the Yankees the rest of that century.
And so here's what we know. They figured out that you'll pay more for flexibility, right? And in fact, what we know is if you're the sort of organization that's willing to spin up a VM on AWS, spin it down when you're not using it, it's pretty cost effective. But most organizations aren't that regiment. And so if you leave it running, it can get very expensive to buy the drink. And in fact, we said a few years ago, you should have a cloud keeper. Somebody who pays attention to the bill, somebody who pays attention to what VMs you're using, right? So that you don't get caught with this big bill at the end.
Somebody who knows what they're doing, who is totally aware of it. That's their job, to pay attention to how much resources are being used.
And so I will state, and I will prove by the end of this presentation, that overcharging is rampant. That you are being overcharged because of the increased complexity of the cloud, right? Around cloud offerings, determining exactly what's required from the vendors means you're getting overcharged. And FUD is their weapon of choice. And in fact, this great line at the end, we were ever over-licensed and struggling under the burden of high support costs. And I always include a link for a statement that I make. And so people, you're getting overcharged.
But it's
And
your fault to a certain extent, because you don't have enough resources dedicated to determining how much resources you're using.
Like, I laugh, we do these license health checks, and we started running the numbers. And a $50,000 health check, on average, returned $2.6 million to the customer. That's why I got into this business full-time. I go, that's a return on investment I can sell. And so, listen, if you don't listen to me, listen to Yoda, right? Advisor you need if it's software licenses you seek. Don't do it on your own. And look for the advisor without conflicts. And that's not an easy thing. Because if their job is to really sell licenses, you think they're going to try to reduce your license count? I don't think so. And so you've got to get that trusted expert, right? Because a license negotiation should not feel like an interrogation. And far too often, and we will make this point and prove it, that's how it feels, right? So you have to know what the vendor's willing to do, what they're not willing to do. When's the best time to get a deal? And so I would say to you, whatever you do when you get for a solution, you better get a solution that includes access to licensed experts on an ongoing basis.
You're going to face major league pitching, you need major league hitters.
Right. And too many organizations go out to their DBAs, right? I'm focusing on Oracle, but they go out to their technical people. Do you really think they have time to screw around with licensing? They don't. And by the way, the rules keep changing, so if that's your company's approach, hey, you're screwed.
And you really ask yourself, is it appropriate for the technical people to be the ones that are the quote-unquote experts on the licensing compliance and the licensing issues and the contracts and so on? And that's often the case, and it always gets you into trouble.
And so to be effective today, it's not just about understanding the license, you got to understand the architecture. And we will make some proof points that show when you understand the architecture coupled with the licensing, you can really do some really interesting things. But the reality is most license experts understand licensing. All right. That's Larry Ellison. The point is that Larry said he would make his cloud cheaper than everyone else.
And how did he do that, Mike?
He doubled the price on public clouds. So if you use hyperthreading, everybody uses hyperthreading, you pay twice as much. So
He didn't lie.
how do you feel about that? I'm going to make my cloud cheaper than everyone else by raising the price. But there's so many lessons to be learned here. You deploy in the cloud, and he changes the rules. Guess what? Oops, you're stuck. Right? Because that's the deal. And Larry can do it, anybody can do it. Now, here's what's really interesting. How much is a hyperthread worth, performance-wise?
About 25% more than what you get with a dedicated physical processor, core.
So would you pay twice as much for 20-something% performance improvement?
I wouldn't.
But if you don't understand the architecture and you can't marry the two, you wouldn't realize that. And so in public clouds, you've got what we call the hyperthreaded tax. But Larry did this, right? We're picking on Oracle. But the other vendors can do things like this, and I'm sure they have.
This is one of the reasons, by the way, also, that the hybrid cloud model, in which you can move around freely, is such an effective model, and will be ultimately the model that everyone goes to.
So he brings up a good point. If you had Utopia, and you could move things from cloud to cloud, you could really do some interesting things. So how does the vendor prevent you from doing that? They create little widgets and capabilities that you use just in AWS that are so good you want to go to the AWS cloud. But they realize that they can get you hooked, a little bit pregnant, right? You can't then move to the competitor. So I made the point that overcharging is rampant. And in fact, Gartner research, our experience suggests that Oracle's interpreting the policy as if it were a contractual obligation from a pricing and compliance perspective.
Gosh, I wouldn't use the word interpreting there, but that's okay. All
right, so what does that mean? Well, let me give you the Mike Corey way. I call it galaxy pricing. If it's in the galaxy, you should pay Oracle. Seem fair? So if you had a 5-node VMware cluster, Oracle's pricing policy states you should pay for every node in the cluster. At $5 million a node, you've now got a $20 million license compliancy issue. And they will look you straight in the face and say, that's our policy.
Of course, it has nothing to do with the contract, but that's,
Right, and that's the point. The contract doesn't say that at all. That's what you owe, what the contract states. And so if you're foolish enough to pay the bill, guess what? That's okay. We had a customer in Japan. They said, we want a letter from Oracle. We said, well, that's $20 million. But if you want to go by a contract, it's $5 million. You choose. But this is the subtle way that they sort of overcharge you because of the policies, right? And architecture really makes such a huge difference. And we'll go into this. This is a case study that we did at License Fortunes. It was a health connector. I don't know if I can say legally where they were, but
I don't know. It's a state very close to me where I live in Littleton and near Denver.
Major health connector, right? Architecturally, we're able to save them about $3.9 million in their maintenance just by changing the architecture.
And they say they mean taxpayers.
Yeah. All right, and so we've been talking for a while.
Holy cow, Mike, you actually have a VMware cup up there this time. He didn't with the silos, but he does now.
You got VMware Love twice.
That's right.
Okay? Twice in the presentation. So I've been stating for a while, and as Dawn, that everybody wants to buy by the drink. That's what the consumer wants. Okay? Interesting enough, the Gartner just issued a report, right? And I have to step here because my eyes aren't so good. March 11th, 2019. Consumption-based pricing is emerging from the leading SaaS providers, but beware.
There's a reason we're all going to subscription-based models, right? It's not necessarily because it's the most optimal way for customers to pay.
And then you've got this ability to just download software and use it with a click of the mouse. Some vendors don't require license keys. So I'm going to pick on Oracle here. You have a large organization, somebody in the organization, maybe you're a college, some professor downloads Oracle software, turns it on, you just created a license obligation.
You remember what it took to download and install still does Sybase? A 26-letter key. Oracle, nope, takes nothing. Download it, start it, run it. They'll come back and ask you for the money later.
So if you're not monitoring your organization and they're downloading software, you just created a huge bill for yourself, right? And in fact, I love this because I think it's a such thing. Installing Oracle version upgrades sometimes turn on features. We had a customer who got a huge bill from Oracle, and by the way, Oracle's not the only one, right? And we got brought in, and we showed how they got it patched. They applied the patch, which was under a security patch, and they turned on all these features. A year later, the audit team came in and tried to hand him a huge bill until we could prove that the patch invoked the features, and they didn't have to pay anything.
But what's even worse is your third-party software that just happens to use advanced Oracle features that you might not even know about, your DBAs might not know about, and who still is responsible for paying for Oracle partitioning or Oracle Advanced Security if that third-party software uses those features.
But the point here is any vendor can do this, and Oracle's not the only one that's doing things like this. Annual audit, it's just no longer enough. Really, I would tell you should do it a minimum quarterly. I would argue that you should be proactive, real time. Because if you catch the mistakes as they're happening, you don't get a big bill. And by the way, I've heard people say, well, we're a really small company. So we had a company in the Northeast. They paid Oracle about $12,000 in maintenance fees. We detected $1 million audit liability. $1 million. It's really easy. And the time bomb's ticking if you can't find it. Training your staff on software compliance is now a requirement, and it's not a one-time event. I mean, how do you feel about training?
Well, I've taught on every possible level, everything for the last 25 years, so the training is very, very important, but what I really think is that the separation between who should be responsible for the license management, the resources in the cloud management, the cloud keeper, should be very much separated from the technical people. And that is especially true under circumstances of an audit in which folks from the auditing team or LMS or some other teams that are coming in that want information want to talk to everybody and anybody. They maybe shouldn't be allowed to talk to anybody and everybody. They should only be talking to the people who are responsible for those areas, the cloud keepers and the license experts.
So we would argue you need those roles. And I use the example of a client that we audited. They got hit for about a $500,000 bill. We went back to the CFO. We had just turned on the license filter software. And they said, oh, no, my staff knows exactly what to do. We've been there, done that. It's never going to happen again. So, well, maybe we should check. So we initially, they know we're auditing. We find a $500,000 mistake. And as we're auditing, the staff makes another $1 million mistake. And this is the staff that just got burned, and everybody knew exactly what to do. So the point there is you've got to train, retrain, remind, and monitor. And so where are we time-wise? Because we only have 45 minutes.
45 minutes, I think we're right there. We're at 12:23. So.
I know we're moving fast, and I'm really sorry.
2:23.
But I think, and it gets progressively better, I think. So the cloud is like renting a car. And what you do with the car is up to you. So, right, so for example, somebody says, oh, AWS handles my security. Really? Well, guess what? If they have a break-in, it's really not their fault. And I'd argue that nobody can handle security for you unless you're part of the equation.
And the backups that you buy, the backups they do for you, they'll do it. They'll sell them to you. Well, all will. But we don't guarantee they work. You
got to do a fire drill and test it. If you don't, it's foolish, right? And so whatever you do, look for a licensed solution that includes a training component. That's the point we're trying to drive home here. All right, the MSP warning. It is very common today to have a third party manage your environment. Very routine. Well, if it's your license and they miss management, you pay the bill. And so if you're using third-party vendors, you better really vet them, because we see way too often they create the problem. And so I like to, and so if a third-party support vendor downloads the software, activates it, you're paying the bill. And so I go back to the healthcare connector, all right? The third-party vendor created a $15 million oops. We settled for about $5 million. Better math, right? I'd say the customer's happy with that. And by the way, they got $1 million from the vendor. I think they should have got a lot more from the vendor. But the point is, third-party vendors create risks from a software perspective. The trend right now is to hold off on upgrades, right? But you want to comment on the fact that vendors are really kind of pushing that way? What about SAP? What's their job right now?
Well, for those of you who may have SAP involvement, you are aware that there is a line in the sand in 2025, which has been around for 3 years now, in which you will have to be using SAP S/4HANA for your database management system. So all of your other databases, 55% of SAP software runs on Oracle. You're going to have to migrate off of it. And that might seem like a long way away. It's not.
And by the way, they convince you financially. Oh, you want to run on an old version? Here's the cost. And it gets progressively more expensive. So whether you want to or not, the vendors are going to push you to upgrade, right? And in fact, when I talk about the fact we've been talking about audits, it's well documented in the press. Hey, the press don't do a lot of things right these days when we beat them up, but when it comes to software licensing, they've actually been doing a pretty good job. Software audits are how high-tech plays hardball, linked to the location, truing up license amounts to billions of dollars. And if you're a company that's struggling with organic growth, licensing is an easy way to get it. Gartner, audits are on the rise and they're getting more expensive, Gartner research. The usual suspects, Microsoft, Oracle, Adobe, IBM, SAP. Software audits continue to rise, right? Vendor-imposed and revenue-motivated audits are increasing for organizations of all sizes. It's easy math. I audit you, I scare you with a big number, I collect a check, right? I changed the rules so you can't lower your footprint. Do I really care if you have shelfware, if you're paying me for it? No. Right? And I absolutely love this. You want to read the top left one, Don? I can't read that.
How strongly, just the title, 77% do not think their company could pass a compliance audit. I'm amazed that it's that high.
And how about the unicorn one?
So down at the bottom, or it says number 8, which of the following is harder to find, a cloud engineer or a unicorn?
A cloud engineer that understands compliance. Their bet is you can find the unicorn first.
Of course, those of you who are following the NBA are calling Stephen Curry the unicorn of shooting in basketball. So maybe we have found one, but still.
Right? And so I love this. When you get an audit, validate that it's a real audit. So Oracle has this thing called License Management Services. They're kind of the IRS thugs. They come and they audit you. Rumor is they're revenue motivated. Well, they created this new thing. It's called SIA. It's a team of experts who work with you to maximize the efficiency, value, and impact of your Oracle audit. So let's modify Reagan's most famous words, right? The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, here from Oracle, I'm here to help. I'm here from IBM, I'm here to help.
And let me say something good about my partner up here on stage and his company. There are many, many other companies out there that purport to do third-party licensing advisement. There are very, very few that me, since this is my province, at VMware trust and consider to be trusted advisors. At the top of that list is certainly License Fortress.
Well, thank you. And so I always look at the Oracle SIA and Oracle LMS. If it looks like a duck, smells like a duck, eats like a duck, walks like a duck, it's an effing duck. I'm from Boston, right? We drop F-bombs. Almost. Didn't do it. People from Boston will absolutely get that. The rest of you, I will. All right. And so,
because, you know, we New Yorkers, we talk with good language. That's right.
So what happens?
We're polite.
What happens when the vendor shows up and says, I'm here to audit you? It's a legitimate audit. Let's just talk about how do you make some basics. First thing you do is stop buying software. All purchases go on hold unless the business needs it and it's critical. The second thing is you should read your contract to understand what you're obligated to, right? So for example, Oracle has a 45-day rule, and most vendors have a rule for their audits. But the rule also says that if it's a bad time for your business, you can push it off. Well, if you're a retail operation and Cyber Monday's coming up, maybe that's not a good time to get in the middle of an audit. Negotiate the scope. How do you feel about Oracle coming and saying we're going to audit the environment and VMware's there?
Well, what does VMware or VMware software have to do with the Oracle software?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. So for example, if you are using VMware software, one of the things that they will want to see is your vCenter, to see all of the different locations in which the VMware software is running. And that is totally out of scope and totally unnecessary, and you shouldn't show it to them. You don't need to.
What if you're a major telecom and you have Oracle databases everywhere, or IBM, you'll put any vendor you want, and you say to them, look, I can't possibly audit every environment. You can negotiate a sample set. They'll work with you. It's got to be reasonable, but so you negotiate. But his point is so important. When Oracle says we're here to audit, figure out what they're auditing, figure out and don't let them allow the scope to be looking at your vCenter in VMware. It's none of their business. The only thing that is business is where Oracle's installed and running, right? And the use of the Oracle audit script is not contractual. I don't know the answer to that on an IBM. I don't know what the answer is on SAP. But sometimes they say, we have to use our script. Well, that's actually not what the contract says. So take the time.
See a pattern here? Know your contract and have at least one individual who is separate from the technical team that has an understanding over what your contracts and all the paperwork that goes with it so that you're prepared when something happens.
The other thing is you got to sit down with your staff and say, the sales rep is not your friend right now. In fact, I would argue you should train them not to talk to Oracle. You should have very few people that are allowed to talk to the vendor, especially during audit. Loose lips, the wrong thing said can cost you a lot of money. So you should control the cone of silence in the old get smart. You should control the message. General counsel. So this is a lawyer that deals with Oracle all the time. Oracle maintains, like I say, the most aggressive audit program of any major software vendor. Its licensing rules are difficult to understand and frequently not clearly stated. Oracle License Managed Services is unforgiving when applying those ambiguous license rules. So don't go into a gunfight with a knife, right? Don't be fooled. Our new quote, March 5th, IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, and by the way, Oracle makes great software. IBM makes great software, right? Feared by customers due to the illegal power they hold, the restrictive terms in their license contracts, and how they use software audits to extract revenue. Information world, right? Info world. They talk about the audit playbook. You audit someone, find some issues, put fear, throw a big number at it. You want to comment on this? This just happened.
So, since we're close to Boston, it's probably worthwhile for all of you to go read about what the city of Providence, there's been a number of now different proactive cases that have been filed against Oracle's various different behavior. Of course, the Mars litigation is the most famous one. We have lawyers on stage at VMworld every year, but the most recent one is the city of Providence, and it has to do, to a certain extent, it's filed in Northern California, of course, because that's where Oracle is, but it has to do, to a certain extent, with the predatory, meritless audit conclusions. And again, keep in mind that partly what happens here is that they're not always just looking for a monetary payoff. Sometimes they're looking to make a deal that has to do with 5 years ago buying an Exadata machine, or now potentially buying cloud services. And that's written up in the actual public part of the litigation.
So what's interesting here, and we're going to discuss in the presentation how you use that behavior against them, any vendor. And so Oracle strong-arm tactics, right? Audit, bargain, close. The point is this is well documented, links to everything. Oracle and IBM are singled out as the vendors that are the most aggressive. Ironically, a survey says people fear Microsoft more. In my dealings with Microsoft, they're reasonable. You're going to pay the bill, but they're reasonable. And so expect third-party audits to become the norm. The more that Oracle and other vendors are going to look for ways to turn up the velocity of audits because it lines their pockets, right? And this is so important because most people don't realize that when you acknowledge you have the software, you have the burden of proof to say, I have a license and I'm using it within the license terms. My words are, you're guilty until proven innocent. In US law, the law works against you. You have an obligation to demonstrate you're using it correctly. And that's very different. That's my 10-minute warning.
It's, keep in mind, it's a little bit different European Union law too, so if any of you. So.
Know your contract. We've been talking about the FUD. And in fact, I love the Gartner. Our experience suggests that Oracle's interpreting the policy as if it were a contractual obligation, right? Generate revenue. Make sure you get a copy of the contract, right? Oracle likes to put URL links. So in 2017, they took the core processor table and they changed it 3 times. How important is the core processor table?
It can mean millions and millions of dollars, and the core processor table is one of the actual documents that is referenced in the contract. And so what you want is that copy of the core processor table that existed at the time you signed the contract. And you need a copy of that, and under pressure, it might be difficult to find. So again, a licensed expert, somebody who's responsible for the documentation wherever you are, will have that as a main focus.
Right? And then if you have a great vendor, that's great, but one day the vendor gets bought out by another vendor, then maybe not so great. So Sun gave us Java for free. Well, now Sun's part of Oracle, right? Guess what? They changed the rules. When you negotiate, you got to find ways to get leverage. And so we talk about this idea of buying a strategic product. If the vendor, like in Oracle, is trying to build their cloud business, that becomes strategic, and you can use it as leverage against them. I think this is so important. When the CFO writes a big check, people lose their jobs. And so this is a great slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. The point is, it makes the point that a software asset management tool, a SAM tool, doesn't solve the whole equation. And that you really need both sides. That's kind of the license fortress, is a little bit of both. So I'm going to get rid of that. So I want to walk through these because I think this is really important. So we created this nice checklist of things you should know. Obtain an independent review of your environment at a minimum annually, right? Continuous monitoring is optimal. Access to licensed experts is optimal. Review your contracts. Get a copy of your contracts. Get an inventory of everything you use and the options you think you use, right? You should know your effective license position. That's the industry term. Your effective license position. Look for shelfware. What happens when you buy a strategic product with shelfware?
When you buy it and you don't use it, well, then eventually it expires. However, you usually can negotiate with your next contract to be able to include that shelfware within the context of your next contract, if you know that it's there, if you know that you have licenses that have not been used. So again, having someone individually who has all this paperwork, has all this documentation, and is aware of it, and knows how to interact with your third-party license managing system is optimal.
And most vendors are going to push back at you, but when you're buying strategic products, all bets are off. You can get credits for those things. I'll give you a trick. You want to know what Oracle strategic products are? Listen to the earnings call. They're going to tell you what's strategic to the business at that time. Listen to it, and now you know what gives you the greatest leverage when you're buying, right? So get that credit. Take advantage of lower cost maintenance. You buy a software product. You've been using it for a long time. You bought the premium support. And now you realize, hey, my staff's pretty good at this. Why am I still buying the premium support? See if you can knock it down. Look at third-party alternatives. Some products have great third-party alternatives. Optimize your existing license usage, right? While making strategic purchases, try to get and negotiate a price hold. Hey, I'd like to lock that price in for 3 years. Timing of maintenance. Don't lose control of when your maintenance comes up for renewal. Don't let things auto-renew. If you're going to drop maintenance, right, then be aware what happens if you have to reinstatement. What are the penalties? In fact, you talked about an approach with Oracle so that you can drop things. Do you remember that conversation?
Well, and I kind of mentioned it just before, the best time to actually reduce your overall cost is the time in which your EULA comes up, and the consideration should be whether or not it makes more sense to start actually building your architecture a la carte. So once you move in that direction, then you can have complete control over exactly how much you're spending, because you are going to have consolidated, because of course you're going to be migrating to a VMware environment, and you will be much, much more efficient overall. And at that point, you're not going to suffer these backdoor penalties of having your support arrangements totally renegotiated.
How many people know what an EULA is? Unlimited license agreement. We're going to talk about some specifics around Oracle EULA, but I would argue that all the vendors do these sorts of things. So timing of when you buy something matters. End of year is a beautiful time to buy software. They will cut better deals. When the vendor contacts you with an audit, don't panic, right? Seek the help of a professional. Negotiate the scope of the audit. Those are really important. Use of the vendor scripts may be optional, right? And the ULA, we're going to talk about the ULA. It's an unlimited license agreement. Vendors love to sell them. Oracle's very good at selling them because they know once you do that, you stop paying attention to what you're using. And before you know it, when the ULA comes up for expiration, you're using a lot more. But the other thing is, what if your company's acquiring companies? Under Oracle's agreement, the date you get acquired, the ULA gets terminated. But if it was a 5-year ULA and you already paid them, you get none of your money back. What if you're going to acquire companies? Maybe you should extend your ULA to allow you to absorb other companies into preferred pricing.
At the point in which you're doing a negotiation, everything's negotiable. Not after that.
So we actually got through about 60 slides in 45 minutes. I apologize for the rapid pace. So any questions out there? Yes, please.
It's all absolutely relevant. Do you have experience beyond the databases for the integration platforms, the BI tools, all of their licensing as well?
So I'm going to answer in case of, so first of all, License Fortress is a combined productized service, and we actually offer that across a lot of Oracle's major products, so we probably got 80% of it covered. We do help people with Microsoft licensing, IBM licensing, but we do it the manual way like most other vendors do. But for Oracle, it's highly automated, and in the next 2 years, we will definitely be launching, we're debating IBM, Microsoft. But the platform's ready to handle it. That's kind of our roadmap.
And just as a point of interesting trivia, the business intelligence reference that was just made, which is considered middleware, not an application, is the most expensive software product in the history of the world. So, good example.
No, my example has been personally going through Informatica relicensing from the public company to the private company to the subscription models. And if you're using their product to build products, right, the licensing around the products you sell that embed them is just, it's all hidden.
So here's the name of the game, right? And I think Gartner really did their customers a justice. Audits are about generating revenue. New license metrics, right? And by the way, we picked on VMware with their licensing of memory. They backed off.
6 months.
Not bad. A lot of vendors would just keep going forward. Do you know of an Oracle customer that's happy about Java licensing? I don't know of anybody that's happy. That's not the deal they had. By the way, vendors like IBM and others have created some good alternatives, right? So you're not really stuck if you know what your alternatives are, but it's about generating revenue.
You have alternatives. The open source Java you have alternative for, but the enterprise edition, the standard edition, everything's going to change. I personally think that there's a bit of a shot across the bow towards our friendly company in Waldorf, Germany, when it comes to them deciding that they are going to terminate every database other than HANA in 2025. So that should be very interesting. I've thought, Mike and I were talking about this, I've been waiting for a titanic battle, Game of Thrones style, the Battle of Waldorf, we'll call it, in the IT industry for many, many years, and I think that's going to be it.
Right?
The same way with the partnership with Azure that they just made. There's an alliance.
Yeah.
Yes, and 2 weeks ago, we announced the VMware Cloud Foundation image on Azure, VMware that is. So that's a Microsoft product.
So any other questions, and then we'll wrap. I want to be respectful because I know there's a break coming up.
We'll be around.
All right. Well, you've been a great audience. Thank you once again. I apologize for the fast pace. That's my mess up.
No, it was great. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.